I want to talk to you about food inflation, and specifically one of the challenges of food protectionism. That is something that you have cautioned policymakers against. Was this something that came up in the conversations here in India? Because India has decided to go down the path of imposing export duties as well as bans on several food commodities.
We saw India using that kind of restriction, and then when conditions improve, removing these restrictions. And I very much hope it would be the case this time around. What India is experiencing is a harvest that is quite problematic because of weather conditions. India has almost 1.4 billion people to feed. This being said, it is not in the interest of India to entice others to go for that kind of restriction, because it undermines open and free trade that is beneficial for India. So as India did last time around, when there was a restriction imposed and then it was relaxed, when there was clarity that the food situation is not as dramatic, I would really hope that we would see the same conscious and careful action this time around. The sooner, the better.
You know, you spoke about Sri Lanka, and the IMF has reached an agreement with Sri Lanka and the current dispensation for about a 48-month period. How confident do you feel about that turnaround? And more importantly, you said that several other countries have also reached out to the IMF seeking extended help. Which are the parts that you're most concerned about? Which are the countries, the regions that you're most concerned about? I know that you have expressed apprehensions about the state of several countries in the African continent. Which parts of the world are most vulnerable when we talk about debt sustainability?
Well, let's look at the data. We have about 25% of emerging market developing economies at or near debt distress. Sri Lanka is a case in hand. Lebanon has been a case for a long time. We know that the situation is much worse for low-income countries. Over 60% of low-income countries are at or near that distress. And we see middle-income countries that traditionally would be with strong fundamentals avoiding falling in that category, like Ghana, now being in it. Ghana has also approached the fund. We are working intensively with the government of Ghana. What has changed is this frequency of exogenous shocks. Shock upon shock upon shock. Even countries with strong fundamentals are becoming vulnerable. And the lesson for us is that we have to concentrate much more on building resilience to shocks, and prudent fiscal policies, sound buffers. This is even more important in this new world we live. When I look at low-income countries, I am really worried. A country like Malawi, no fuel, no food, and yet that is unsustainable, makes the entry of the IMF more difficult. My message to the creditors, especially the large creditors, like China, 37% of loans to low-income countries are from China, or the private sector, which is even a bigger creditor, is you have done a needed job to provide financial resources for growth. That is not necessarily bad, but in the environment of these shocks, when that is not sustainable, show leadership, move rapidly to provide debt relief to countries so we can help them. They can step up on their feet, they can grow again, and be a viable investment opportunity.
One of the other goals, and I know that that is something that you've been passionate about as well, is bridging the gender gap. And the IMF has put together a comprehensive strategy to be able to help member nations do that. Does it worry you that while some progress has been made through the pandemic, things have gotten worse, not better?
It does, and this is what motivated us to move fast with our mainstreaming gender strategy, because it is a huge loss for the economy that women are pushed back. Gender inequality is, of course, morally wrong. You and I can vouch for that. But it is also really bad economics. Women are a great force for entrepreneurship. They are fantastic in terms of how they use their income for their families, for education, for health, for their children. And also women have the ability to contribute much more broadly in society than currently in many countries they do. So what we think is viable for the fund, since we are about macroeconomic, financial stability, growth and employment, to pressure for gender-based budgeting, so governments think how their public money can bring this incredible resource into the marketplace, how we can get more inclusion of women, especially financial inclusion, and again, India is a bright spot in that regard as well, and how we can get the story of gender equality to be more about the well-being of families, communities, and countries than just about women.
I think that's aptly put. We need to involve all stakeholders in the conversation and not make it just about the women or for the women. But, you know, I want to go back again to the issue of fund flows, because that is something that you've been cautioning about as well. You talked about the dollar's strength and the implications that plus the higher interest rates are likely to have on fund flows, and we have seen fund flows dry up to emerging markets. This is what I think the fourth consecutive month that we've seen that happen. Is it likely to get worse, and what could be the implications of that?
Well, let me start with the positive. Emerging markets actually were quite fast to recognize that they need to tighten monetary policy, and they did it, many of them, before advanced economies moved. That has helped not to get in a very dramatic discourse. However, you're right, there is this flight to safety. And what it means for emerging markets is to double down on making investment climate really attractive. Identify barriers, remove those barriers, and be much more aggressive on issues that have been holding investments back, especially transparency of contracts. That applies also to debt. Who do they borrow from, at what conditions, and overall good governance. And of course, we know very often we say good governance, what we mean is fight corruption.
Do you anticipate that 2023 is going to be far worse than 2022?
It would be worse. How much worse depends on variety of factors that we don't know. The longevity of the war, whether there would be any other shock. But there is one factor in our hands: how collaborative we are. The more we work together, the less pain there will be.
But is there any indication of that? You said that we're living in a fragmented world, so is there any indication of more synchronized collaborative action?
There are these good signals. Central banks coming together. When did they come together? When it became really scary. I hope we can come together on other issues as well, on trade, on debt, on climate, and it is a bit a chicken and egg. If we give up and say, oh, it's fragmented, we can't do it, then it is likely to be even worse. If we just roll our sleeves and work to show everybody why it is in your interest to collaborate with others, and then we build a platform for this collaboration. Multilateral institutions today have a huge responsibility to be the place of unity, as challenging that may be.
You know, you talked about central bankers coming together as the world got scarier. What is the thing that scares you the most from the perch that you sit at? And what is the one thing that gives you hope today?
What scares me the most is us falling on a down spiral in terms of global cooperation and justifying it with, we haven't been quite fair during the golden era of globalization. Not everybody benefited, but we kind of pretended that was the case. So be honest, and then identify where we have problems, and then tackle them. Don't shy away from them. And I worry that the forces of pushing us away may get even stronger in a context of prolonged war, and a war that may have other unexpected spillovers. What gives me hope? We people are very inventive, and we do have the smarts to overcome challenges. Take the pandemic. In 1 year, we had vaccines. So if only we could invent a vaccine against moving away from each other, a vaccine that makes us hug each other, the world would be a great place.
Well, and we hope that if we do get that vaccine, it is available and accessible to all, because that wasn't the case with the COVID-19 vaccine. Kristalina Georgieva, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for joining us here on the Global Dialogue. We appreciate your time, and I suspect you're going to have a very busy year going ahead. Thanks very much. Appreciate it. With that, it is time for us to wrap up this edition of the Global Dialogue. From all of us here on the team, goodbye. Thanks for watching.